And I'm back. Sorry for the long wait, been kind of spaced out with LVLup just around the corner and life in general, so I've kind of been slacking. But if you've been around for a while, you'll remember from my previous videos that I haven't been all too impressed by the other ring imps. Like, I still love them and still think they're probably Viv's best idea, even though they're mostly based around Satan, but the idea that each imp came from a different ring, looks different from each other, is such a fun idea and great world building. And at the time when we only knew about lust imps, I was excited to see what we would get next, only to go to the greed ring, sloth ring, and gluttony ring and find not much difference in what we already have from wrath imps. And yeah, I know most of the imps in the background are staff sonas, but the imps we do get that I'm like 75% sure aren't staffs aren't all that different or unique to the ring they live in like the lust imps were. For example, the lust imps showed there is a difference between your typical main wrath imp by being slightly taller and having wings. Colored wings specifically, since nearly all succubus have black wings, which now I'm looking at Verosica funny, but still, there was a difference. And honestly, it didn't even need to be that big a difference, since the succubus already kind of look like imps, but are more humanoid. But when we get to the greed imps, we get basically mafia wrath imps. Like, there's no real hint to where they could be from, and based on the citizens in greed, I feel there was a lot that could have been done to show they specifically come from greed. Like, we have dinosaurs, skeleton jesters, and loan sharks. You're telling me that there's no subcategory of any of these types of imp evolutions? Like, you could still keep the mafia aspect, just make 4 greed evolutions of imps that fight over turf or whatever, because it would kind of make sense for greed to have more than one evolution of imps. Yet they didn't really do that. I mean, you could argue the hybrids, but they'd be like first generation and not exactly standard greed imps. But at least the greed ring got imps. I know we only saw the gluttony ring once and it's primarily hellhounds, but seeing as though imps can mate with just about anything, I'm surprised there's no imp/hellhound evolution wandering around, though the show does keep implying that hellhounds are pets, so I guess it would be weird for that to happen. Plus, we never see the rest of Gluttony, so we have no idea if there are any other citizens in Gluttony besides hellhounds. I mean, this background imp kinda implies there might be insect citizens, but that's just me guessing at this point. And though Sloth has its own weird mess of citizens, I can kinda imagine their imps are pretty similar to wrath imps due to the goat citizens, and wrath imps already looking kinda similar in the leg department. I think the only difference would be the face, but too bad we'll probably never know because I tried. There are like no sloth imps that I could 100% say are sloth imps. But that's about it. So yeah, we're 4 rings in and only 1 ring really showed the difference in location. I mean, yes, we do have hybrids and that's great, but you can only tell they're a hybrid due to the other parent being a ring citizen, not another ring imp. I mean, look at Moxie. He's half greed imp and half wrath imp, yet he looks like a typical wrath ring imp and you'd never know the difference. Like, hell's been around for eons, yet you're telling me that imps in greed, sloth, and gluttony haven't evolved at all? No, I'm not buying that. So for this video, I decided to try and show you guys the possibility of what could have been done to showcase the difference in ring and how the locations evolved the imps to fit with the environment, starting with Wrath, the one who started it all. So, the Wrath citizens, I think, are pretty perfect. I mean, the location is clearly desert volcanic farmlands, clearly old school Western style, which makes sense for the sin and the fact that Satan is depicted with horns and goat-like legs. And most animals in areas like this are cows, horses, and goats. So, yeah, it makes sense for your typical Wrath imp to look like what we get, but I think what could help the audience 100% know their Wrath imps is by limiting the horn shapes and face shapes instead of the imps having humanish faces. Like the succubuses, you could use cow or goat-like face shapes along with the horns. I mean, look at Millie. She's the most human-looking wrath imp, and her horns are curved similar to succubus citizens' horns. If it weren't for her accent, would we really know where she was from? Because even her skin tone kind of hints to succubus as well. I mean, she's the brightest of her family, and it's still not super clear if the brightness is their version of pale, as most of the background imps all share a pretty similar dusty red color, which I think works best due to their location and helps with the variety of the other rings, which we'll get into later. So for this, we'll say typical Wrath Imp woman. I made her face shape more cow-like, along with adding darker coloring around her mouth to really sell the look. I also made her a much darker dusty red color to help blend in with the environment. I imagine that Wrath Imps, even though very powerful and bloodthirsty, are still considered prey type species due to their size, which is kind of why they stay in large groups. The typical Wrath woman is quite buff, though the males are much bigger. Do keep in mind there are still different body types. This is just the standard. Female horns are also just as large as the males and come in a variety of styles, which I will put here for you. Also, now, the black parts of a typical Wrath Imp are mainly for the tail, as that is their weak spot. I'd like to think that due to that, they either coated in poison or have adapted to making their own from their tails, hence why I drew her tail without the other point to it, and you'll see why that's important for later. As for the eye style, I still think that the OG eye style works best, because when their red irises come out when they're upset, it's really noticeable and works to showcase their anger, which I think sells the whole look. But even though I like the idea of that happening in the show, it kind of confused me and others at the time due to Blitz's eyes always having red irises showing. Obviously, this was all before theories about Blitz being a hybrid imp were tossed around, but the fact it's the same color as when a Wrath Imp gets upset kind of messes with the world building a bit, not to mention a lot of other citizens have similar colored eyes, but they aren't mixed or hybrids. So yeah, for this version of imps, only Wrath Imps have this ability. However, instead of their irises turning red, I think it'd look cooler and more on brand with the sin if the yellow parts of their eyes turned fully red, like the whole eye, since the traditional color of Wrath is red. As for the legs, again, typical goat/cow legs, even horse legs could work for them. However, the hooves only come in two sets of colors, darker red or black. And that's about it for the Wrath Imps. Again, what we got is relatively fine. I just think there needs to be more obvious factors to help identify a typical Wrath Imp, along with creating some limitations. Think about it like a closed species. There are specific rules that help keep everything looking like it belongs. Obviously, you can add variety. It's just about making sure the design fits within the world and location. Like, I guess a better way to describe it would be like D&D races, where you have elves, humans, and halflings, which they all kind of look pretty similar, but there's big enough differences to tell where they come from and belong and what exactly they are. You know what I mean? I just wish there was like a tiny bit of limitations when it came to the Wrath Imps themselves. I'm going to explain it with the others anyway. And speaking of others, let's move on to Gluttony. Okay, since we never saw Gluttony imps and the only possible idea on a Gluttony imp is this background imp, I decided to just do my own thing. Because I mean, all I got to go off is that Beelzebub is a fox bee and we already have hellhounds. And yeah, I could technically just make them bee themed, but I feel that works best for the Gluttony citizens and not the Gluttony imps, since they're still a lower class. So that left me wondering, what exactly could a Gluttony imp be based around? Because we do know that most citizens are based around their prince or stick to the theming of the ring itself, and since we're taking Wrath citizens and mixing them with bee citizens, which years later creates the typical Gluttony imp, I had to make it make sense for why they are the way they are now, which is ant themed, more specifically honeypot ants. So for the typical female Gluttony imp and also the male Gluttony imp, I should have said in my Wrath section, but nearly all the males are similar looking, just with white hair variants and thicker horn stripes. But yeah, for the typical Gluttony imps, they have a more orangey red skin color to help blend in. Their body is more exoskeleton styled, but is still pretty soft due to their ability to expand their tails. Just like a honeypot ant, they are able to grow twice their size to carry nectar to the hive. Plus, thanks to them being an evolution of a typical Wrath imp, they are able to keep the strength part of their genetics. They are the closest to looking the most like a typical Wrath imp, but due to their eye color style and horns, it's easier to tell the difference. Their eye color style will always match their inner tail color and will sometimes even change due to the color of the nectar they're carrying. As for the bee parts of their evolution, only a rare few have wings, and the only ones who have them are female. As for the horns, there's only two versions. The females shape point forward while the males point back. attack. Also, fun fact, the Gluttony imps are quick, skilled builders, along with having a great sense of direction. Though they live similar to the Wrath imps, aka they live in large groups, as again, they're more prey-like, as they're extremely small compared to the Gluttony citizens. However, they are typically kinda taller than the average Wrath imp, but only when full of nectar. And though they are quite strong, they have lost a bit of their original strength, so the typical Gluttony female imp's body is more lean, though their thighs and chest are still relatively strong. The only true downside of being a Gluttony imp is the constant purging. Also, all Gluttony imps have large round eyes as well as a more bug-like mouth, and that's about it. Most of what makes Gluttony work for this type of imp is mainly due to how I redrew Gluttony as a whole. As you can see, the imps live under the hive cities, collecting sap to create their own cities, as they're mostly used as delivery systems. And speaking of delivery, or well, a weird form of it anyway, let's just get to Sloth. Okay, so since we didn't see any Sloth imps, again, I did my own thing, and this is where some of y'all are gonna have to watch my Sloth video to get a few things, but I kind of rewrote Sloth to be like this winter cyberpunk utopia that's insanely advanced compared to the other rings, and thanks to the super small imps we see in the show, it gave me the idea to make this imp evolution super small. Due to the city being mostly tech-based, it would make sense to have small imp workers. But this kind of left me thinking how this would happen due to the citizens being more troll-like. Yeah, I changed the citizens. The Prince of Sloth is clearly based around a troll, and yeah, there could be other types of citizens since they don't have to mimic their prince, but with Sloth being the way it is, I can imagine there isn't much variety in citizen species, so mixing the two would result in something way different. However, due to how fast Sloth is, and with the added selection of only allowing smart imps into the city, I can see how the evolution of this version of Sloth imps came to be, which is rat-based. Rats are extremely active and smart, or at the very least good at tasks, which works for the Sloth citizens who draw the designs for the inventions and then have the Sloth imps do all the work. And due to their small size, they have a much larger population. Again, imps are traditionally prey animals, so it makes sense for them to live in large groups and to be quite social, especially when collaborating with others. Now, as you can see, for a typical Sloth imp female, their hair covers their whole body to help keep them warm. Their faces are more round and noses pointed up. The hairless parts are from their coloring style of typical Wrath imps, aka the mouth area. As for hands and feet being hairless, it's mostly a sweat thing, including their tails. Again, the tail is the weakest spot for an imp, so the black markings are a normal occurrence. However, the Sloth imps don't have the venom capabilities. Their horns are still the same as a typical Wrath imp, as that's the one thing that won't change, but their horns are much smaller, since if they had larger horns, they wouldn't be able to move all that fast. Also, I should point out that the tallest they can get is about 1 foot, and as you can see, their eyes are quite different, no longer having yellow sclera, as they've evolved more to now mimic their prince's color, which is a light blue. You'll notice later, but the closer an imp evolution is to their prince's sin, the more their colors start to change to mimic that. Because you'll kind of even notice that the Sloth imp's skin color is becoming more bluish. As for why their eyes are now square, it's mostly a style choice to showcase their more tech-inspired world, or I guess more specifically pixels, since they're small and pixels are literally small squares that make a picture. Oh, also, due to the female imp's hair being darker, they will dye their hair bright colors, since Sloth is a dark winter wonderland. A lot of the Sloth imps blend too much and it makes it harder to see them, so they dress in bright colors and dye their hair to help be seen better. Now on to the sexiest imps. Okay, the Lust imps, I won't lie, I both like and don't like the designs for the Lust imps, mainly because of how similar to the succubus they are. Because let's be honest, if we didn't know about the horn difference, would we really be able to tell the difference? But at the same time, I'm like, well, succubus already kind of look like imps, but taller, pinker, and with wings. It's mainly their eyes and horns that help you know the difference, and after digging a bit, I noticed that there's no other Lust citizens other than the succubus and incubus citizens. so it makes sense that the Lust imps look almost identical to Lust citizens, though I think there could be more ways to separate them just a bit. That way we still know who's who in the long haul, but obviously I couldn't do much since, again, the Lust citizens already look super similar to imps, so I kinda reworked the Lust citizens, and as you can see, they're more color-coded and bat-like. The males have a more traditional Lust blue color, while the girls have a more new age pink color. Obviously, the succubus and incubus can shapeshift, so the color isn't set in stone. They also have fur collars, bat ears and nose, and black markings on their legs and arms. They also all have heart-shaped tails with hearts in the middle of their tails. They also have black and white eyes. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not saying the S word anymore. That's too damn hard. So for the typical Lust imp, the skin color for them does not change. Every Lust imp will have a more vibrant red or candy apple skin tone, as they can get pretty pink, but not by much. We're still in the red category for this one, but with more pink hue. Their wings are flesh colored and hang lower on their backs. They also cannot fly, they can only glide. Their arms and legs are also black and quite strong, which again, the black parts are a lot tougher, so that part of their body is pretty strong. However, their hooves still don't come in black, so that's why her hooves are the same color as her. Their tails also come in a heart shape, though more sharp edge, and again, the tips of their tails are black. Lust imps still pretty much stick to Wrath imp biology, where their hair and horns tell you if they're male or female, but their underlining color is a bit different. Female imps have a more dark maroon hair color, while males have a very light white pink hair. They also do not have bat ears or noses, but have sharper fangs and a fur collar, along with white eyes. Lust imps, unfortunately, are the only imp subspecies that didn't really get much from their ring in terms of power or abilities. They can't shapeshift or fly or cause sexy dreams. They mostly just look similar, though they do have the ability of seductive voice, which is just like a siren song, but less powerful than a typical succubus. The only thing that seems to be consistent is their abilities in bed, which is always a 10 out of 10, though that does cause some issues, as Lust imps are not the type to stay in large groups, as they are very territorial and jealous. At work, they're fine, obviously, but in their personal lives, look out. And speaking of looking out, let's talk about the greed imps. So yeah, I did not care for the greed imps in the show, don't get me wrong. I think the reason the show didn't make them look different was because greed is something within sin, but it still was kind of lackluster. I mean, with the greed ring having very distinct and different citizens, you'd think the imps living there would have adapted to look like them, or have some subspecies of different greed imp types, but there isn't. I mean, there's the occasional hybrid imp, but I'm looking for evolution imps, and there are none. Like, sorry, I know I've said it a million times, but Moxie is our connection to greed. His mom is from Wrath and his dad is from greed, yet Moxie's dad gives us nothing. And the fact they look identical is just irritating, because how cool would it have been if Moxie's dad looked nothing like him, yet they had the same voice? P.S. I'm still super in love with concept art Crimson. I mean, just look at this man. Ugh. What we could have had. Cause like, they didn't need to look alike for the whole Moxie isn't gonna be like his dad trope, just cause they look alike. And I'm getting off topic, sorry. It's just, I really wish that there was more thought put into the world building and class system. I mean, think about it. If there were evolutions of imps from all rings, how would they respond to each other? We all know imps are the lowest of the low, yet how does that affect what ring they're in? And how are the hybrid imps treated? Inner classes and hierarchies do exist, yet we'll probably never see it. But enough of all that, let's just get into the typical greed imp female. Also, greed imps are probably the second evolution of imps who look less like their original. They are roughly the tallest and strongest, as their strength grew due to their abilities. So the typical female greed imp is quite big, though the males are bigger. Both don't really have to worry about keeping in shape, as their bodies have a high density of muscle, which works for them, as their jobs are mainly digging and finding gemstones. And speaking of gemstones, as you can see, this greed imp has green claws, head spines, tail spines, and tail tip. All this coloring lets you know what type of gemstone she can find. All greed imps have different colors to signify their gem specialty, which kind of helps Maman out, as he can get a group of them to find specific gems in specific areas. The only problem is gold colored greed imps are extremely rare, though that doesn't stop them from trying to find gold. Though greed imps have the ability to find specific gems, they can still technically find any other gem. They're just not as interested in looking or have an easier time finding them. And how they find gems is by smells, so you can see how finding other gems might be a tiny bit more difficult for a gem-specific imp. But yeah, they are able to smell gems thanks to their long dragon-like nose. They can smell up to 20 times better than the average imp, and yes, the greed imps are more dragon-based. I did find some info on the imps in the show, and apparently they have a tendency to hoard, which I feel would have worked better for just the greed imps. So yeah, greed imps do hoard a lot and also have a weakness for shiny things, and though they love gems and fancy things, they are the most plain looking of the rings. So keep that in mind. Their eye style is still similar to the wrath imps. Head shape somewhat similar, just more pointed up. Leg shape similar as well, just with claws instead of hooves. Their tails share more similarity with the lust imps, as they don't have to worry about their tail as much, but also it's much wider and flatter and acts as a shovel at times. The only big enough difference is their hands and color. Their hands are 3 times the size of a normal imp. Though they have tools to dig, nothing gets the job better than digging for it yourself. As for the coloring, similar to the sloth imps, they have evolved so much they no longer share much of the reddish tone of the wrath imp. They mainly come in shades of dusty yellows, though their inner skin pattern still has a bit of a red hue to it. Oh, also, the spines on their back is for stability, for when they're digging in tight spaces, and also to attract mates. The greed imps, also like the lust imps, are not considered prey types, so they just keep to themselves. There is no issue among them. They don't have much of a territorial issue. You know, they're fine. They're fine doing what they want to do. They have no beef. The only real issue is gem sickness, but nearly every greed citizen can suffer from this, so it's not just a greed imp thing. And though the greed imps have no issues with each other, it's not the same for other imp citizens. Nearly, if not all, other ring imps hate greed imps. Hell, all of hell hates the greed ring due to being conned or robbed or taken advantage of. Not all greed imps are like what's said about them, but the prejudice still continues, though there is one ring that kinda has a soft spot for the greed ring. Now, we still haven't seen the envy ring yet, or possible imps other than this one, and I'm pretty sure it's mixed with a loan shark, which is another can of worms I'd like to talk about some other time. But yeah, we haven't had anything to go off. I mean, similar to the greed ring, there seems to be a vast number of envy citizen types, so there's probably a crazy number of subspecies of envy imps, but I like to think envy themselves keeps tabs, as again, imps, regardless of the rings they come from, are still the lowest in their hierarchy, so I'm sure they mostly did like a selective breeding. I mean, I don't think wrath imps had much time to adapt due to envy being completely underwater, so yeah, I went with 2 ideas. One, the envy imps were based around clownfish, but I didn't see how that type of fish would be helpful in the envy society, so I went with basing them around my second option, sexy shrimp. Yes, that is what they're called. Don't ask why, I haven't figured it out. But I love that they look like clownfish, so it was a good mix. So a typical envy imp's body is quite tough. Similar to the gluttony imps, they have a sharp exoskeleton or shell. The typical body type is that of a swimmer's, but again, that's just the standard. They are actually very close in size and style as the gluttony imps. You could almost call them distant cousins, but the differences are pretty noticeable. Their spikes and spots glow due to envy's constant darkness. They also have a much more high pointed face to help swim faster and extra arms. They don't do much, but they're there. Similar to the greed imps, the envy imps are very good at digging, though they mostly do it as a way to clean up areas. Envy imps are the cleaners of the sea. Anything that's thrown into the ocean or ends up there gets taken away by them or eaten, depending on what's thrown in there. They're not picky. They also are very fantastic dancers. I mean, lots of envy citizens are great dancers, but these little suckers can move. And though they're not the smallest imp evolution, they are still incredibly small compared to the citizens, which is why they live in big groups to feel more secure, which works best for them as they're easily startled. Now, as you can see, the envy imp's tails are the most evolved thing on them, as trying to swim with a thin tail with no fins is impossible. Also, with it being so long, they'd have been eaten in no time, so the envy imp's tails have evolved to avoid that issue and to swim better. Though they're more built for walking, they are able to swim with it and even blend with it, as there's coral that they can blend in with. And like I said with the Sloth imps about the coloring, also applies to the Envy imps. Eyes, they're so evolved, they now share more color with their prints, hence the eyes and spots. Also, their horns are very thin and point back, both for females and males. And I kind of glossed over Sloth, Lust, and Greed's horn styles. So for Sloth's horn styles, you can do almost anything, just keep it really small. Their horn styles are more shape dynamics, so like triangles, rectangles, like shapes. It's mostly shapes. For the Lust imps, it's pretty much the same that I already have for males and females, but like you can do more heart-shaped. Anything heart-shaped, like inward or outward, is fine. And then for the Greed citizens, like anything dragon styled, so like go big or go home, right? Like go absolutely nuts with the style of horns for these things. Just don't go like too big, because obviously I'm like that might be a little too much. But yeah, anyway, back to what I was saying. Oh, and their hair color is colored more similar like the Lust imps. The females have a dark green color, while the males have a very light white green hair. And that is it. Man, this was a big thing to make, but I feel so much better. I get not everyone is going to understand my love for world building and evolutionary science, but if you're going to do a big world type of project that requires a lot of fantasy races and locations, then well, this might be important to keep in mind. I mean, there's a reason Bigfoot lives in the forest and Yetis live in snowy mountains. They're each built for the environment they live in, which is why I love the idea of other ring imps so much. Like the fact that they can mate with just about anything and can evolve to mimic the citizens around them is super cool and fun. And I just wish the show had put just a tiny bit more thought into it, along with adding some rules and limitations, because yeah, it's fun to make an Imsona any way you want, but sometimes they tend to go really far to the point it kind of doesn't look like it comes from the world. Like obviously my second attempt at my Imsona is what I'm talking about, because Jesus Christ, what the was I thinking about? But still. But anyway, this was so much fun, and I'm so happy to be back at it again. Also, some final stuff. 1. Yes, you may design your OCs or Sonas off by designs. Go nuts. And 2. There are no Pride Ring imps, as they can't do much with the sinners, aka have babies with them, and the only other citizens they can get started with is the Goetia birds, and I don't see that happening anytime soon. But for the Hell of a Boss rewrite, I did make the Pride Ring an area mixed and hybrid imps go to live, as mixing rings is kind of a taboo thing. Anywho, next video will be a haul video on all the fun stuff I got at LVLup and did. I'll be in my Luna cosplay, so that'll be fun. And then finally, I'll draw and talk about Funtime Freddy. I swear I didn't mean to forget him. I just got busy, but yay! Anyway, remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It really helps out the channel and me. I hope you all have a super fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!